Hello, everyone. My name is Yosef Dweck. I'm very grateful to be able to share in this amazing 24 hours of Torah for Chizuk and and some focus on in terms of what's happening now for all of Klal Yisrael, which is terribly distressing and painful, and a myriad of other feelings that we have, sadness and anger and what's important, I think, I just wanted to share. The truth is that all I really want to share is one halacha with with everyone. But before I get to that halacha, a bit of a framework and orientation towards it. I think that one of the things that we all feel on a certain level, I shouldn't say we all, but I think many of us feel on a certain level, the majority of Klal Yisrael, I'll say, feel on a certain level, is that we are not directly able to affect things. And I think that this project, right, this 24 hours Mehfela Leora is one of the things that is being done, Baruch Hashem, to do something and to be engaged, because we see that the Oyev has come in and has caused us terrible, terrible pain, loss, damage. And we are all touched by this. I have to say, I'm speaking to you ba'avonot from the Gola. And I have people all over the world who I've been speaking to and who've been talking to me about the experience and the feeling. And the one thing that we all feel is that that every member of Klal Yisrael is touched by this, affected by this, pained by this, hurt by this. And if there has been any aspect of it that has overall been I don't know if I should say, I think it's more, but I'll at the very least say a residual effect, is that it has brought us closer. And I'm sure that those who've come before me have said that. But at the same time, we are certainly feeling in the Gola a discomfort, the likes of which most of us have not felt for, I could say, a very long time. I think for most of us that we have not felt in our lifetimes. Some of the older ones, some of the older members of our Kehilot say they remember this. And that's terribly frightening and uncomfortable. I live in London. I'm sure that you've been seeing what's been going on here in London. I'm sure that that's been coming up on your, in your news reels and feeds, however it is that you get it. But I was recently in New York for the wedding of my Bechor, of my oldest son, which in and of itself was awkward to have a wedding and a simcha during this time. I'm sure so many people that are celebrating smachot are in this time are feeling the same kind of awkwardness, but at the same time feeling this is what we must do, that we are Am Yisrael, and we keep saying over and over again, Am Yisrael Chai, and that what better to do than to build another Beit Ne'eman b'Yisrael. So there are various aspects of it, but I was in New York, which is where the wedding took place. And normally when I go to New York, I'm like I said, I'm living in London. I'm the senior rabbi of the Sephardi community here. And normally when I go to New York, they ask me, "Are you okay there? Is everything all right with anti-Semitism there?" And I usually say it's not worse than it is in New York. But now I went to New York, and the people in New York, which is probably the largest Jewish population in one area outside of Israel, said to me, "Is it as bad in London as it is here?" And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And that puts things into perspective. It means that, without question, Ait Sarah Yaakov on various levels, all over the world. And I think that for many of us, we have not really experienced this level, this cohesive, complete feeling of being in, at the very least, a level of discomfort, and more than that, a level of danger for much of our lives. And I recognize that speaking to those in Eretz Kodshenu v'Tifartenu, it's different. It is different. This is not the same discomfort as being as in an Eretz Nechar, an Admat Nechar, and feeling terribly unwelcome. And how much it highlights how important it is that we are, and how amazing it is. I've said many times since the beginning of this war, people talk about it as being a pogrom on the Aretz. People talk about it in many ways, but I think that it's very important for us not to forget that with all of it, we are fighting this war as a sovereign people on our own land. And that in and of itself is one of the greatest nisim that our people have seen in the last 2,000 years, and we have our share of nisim as a people. And that must not be lost on us. And we must gain our strength, I believe, from that very point, that we are a sovereign people again on our land, fighting this war on our land. The last time we've seen anything like this is in the Tanakh, for all intents and purposes. So I do think that it's important for that. Therefore, I think it's important to go back to the halachot of milchama. And like I said, there's only one halacha that I want to share. But before I say that, I did reference at the beginning that there's a feeling somewhat, I keep hearing from so many people, both in the Aretz and outside of the Aretz, of a feeling slightly, I know helpless is a strong word, but feeling to a certain degree that there's, what can we do? And like I said, I really do think that this limud that is happening here and happening all over the world in so many different ways, the readings of Tehillim, the engaging in mitzvot, the re-embracing of our Torah on so many levels, is absolutely something that we can do. But I keep thinking about the story of Esther and the Megillah with regards to this. In that situation, we were also in terrible danger. And there was only one person that could do anything about it in terms of how things were set up, and that was Esther. And she says to Mordechai, when she recognizes that it's her or nothing, she says to Mordechai, Lech kenos et kol haYehudim, gather all the Yehudim, get them all together. Now, obviously, that are in Shushan, right? To gather them all together. And she says to him, Sumu alai. She doesn't say tsumu, right? Which means fast. She doesn't say tsumu. She says Sumu alai. Fast for me. And I will go in, asher lo chadat. I will go in inappropriately, right? As not invited. Asher avadti, and what will happen to me will happen to me. And the reason why I think of that is because I think in this situation, the Esther of the story is Tzahal. They have to go in. And all of us need to play a supporting role. And what did Esther ask for? Esther asked for tzom. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should all continue, to do a tzom en masse. Far from be it from me to suggest such a thing. But I do think that it's important to understand what tzom is. The Rambam writes in Hilchot Ta'anit that tzom is midarkei teshuvah. It's amongst the pathways of teshuvah, and the reason for it is that when we are not eating, we are focused on why we are not eating. So the goal of a tzom is focus of mind, is bringing something to consciousness. Because if we're not eating, we're wondering why we're not eating. So Chazal use this all the time, right? They will use eating as a way to keep us to remembering, right? So Chazal say, anytime they want us to remember something, they tell us not to eat. So I said, don't eat before you say Kiddush. Don't eat before you say Havdalah. Don't eat before you light Nerot Hanukkah. Don't eat before you check for the Hametz. Don't eat before you pray Mincha, and so on and so forth. All of that. Don't eat before you count Sefirat HaOmer. All of that is to be able to keep us aware that we're not allowed to eat. Why? Oh, we have something to do. So the Rambam writes that the purpose of tzom is not suffering. The purpose of tzom is focus of mind, and that we keep our minds aware when we deprive ourselves of eating. So again, I'm saying this as an idea not to encourage tzom. Again, it's not in my remit to suggest such a thing. But nonetheless, to recognize that what was important then, was that the entire city of Shushan should be focused on Esther and what she needs to do. And that was effective, and that was the supporting role. That was absolutely essential. And I think today, it was not possible in that time, during the time of Esther, to be kones kol hayudim mamash, because we didn't have the communication skills and abilities, even though they had very fast riders, as it says in the Megillah, and they got word out to the entire empire as quickly as possible. They didn't have the situation that we do now. We have connection with each other in ways that we never had before, and that's also something to recognize, the remarkable nature of our time. There's positives and negatives to that, but the positive is that we can all be connected all around the world. All of Am Yisrael can be connected virtually, like I'm speaking to you now from London, all over the world. And I do think that it is important to recognize that in this story, in this particular chapter of the long and unending story of Klal Yisrael, the Esther of this story is Tzahal. And they have to go in. And our supporting role is to focus our minds completely on them. So the other side of Tzom is the deprivation of it and the recognition that there's teshubah oriented. There's a teshubah orientation to that. That we focus our minds, but we focus our minds on what is important and what is right and what is mitzvah. And I think that this 24 hours of Me'afela Le'ora that Nishmat is holding is very much playing into that role of support and care and the focus of our hearts to our brothers and sisters who are going in for us in the ways that they are. There's something more to it, though, because I think that, part of one of the words that I did not use when I was talking about the feelings that we all have, we have anger and we have sadness and I didn't use despair. I didn't use despair because I don't think that we overwhelmingly, en masse, as a people, feel despair. I think we are terribly distraught, but I don't think we feel despair, because despair goes against hope, tikva. And we must have tikva. It is what has brought our people through so much of this, throughout all the generations. I think it's important for us to recognize how central that is. Nowadays, when I say my Shema Yisrael, aside from the kavanah that one is supposed to have in saying the Shema Yisrael halacha, I also think Lishuatcha kiviti Adonai, that I have kivui, I have tikva for the Yeshua of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the salvation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the reason I have that kavanah is something that the Ramchal teaches. The Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, 17th century, 18th century, he wrote a book called Taktu Tefilot, which means Hamesh Me'ot v'Hamesh Tefilot, right? That's the Gematria of Taf Kof Tetvav. Why did he call it that? He says because it bases it on a midrash that when Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed to go into the Aretz, it says V'Hanan el Adonai ba'artahi, V'Hanan Gematria 515, and that's a siman that Moshe prayed 515 tefillot HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So based on that, the Ramchal wrote 515 tefillot. He wrote a book of 515 tefillot. It's called Taktu Tefillot. And each and every single tefillah begins with the same words and ends with the same words. The opening of the tefillah always starts, all 515 of the ones that he wrote, opens with the words, El Ehad Yahidu Muhad. The single God, right? No other God. Yahid, El Ehad, he's one. He's not made of parts. There's not many parts to him. He's Yahid, there's no other than him. He's Muhad, he's absolutely unique. And it ends with the words, every tefillah ends with the same words, Lishuatcha kiviti Adonai. I hope for your salvation, Kadosh Baruch Hu. What does one have to do with the other? When one recognizes that when we say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, that there is only one God, and that He is the source for all things, everything ultimately comes from that source. And everything is directed by that source. And everything ultimately will reach its end by the direction and guide of that source that we call HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is Hashem Echad. And when we recognize that, we understand the pasuk, Rabot mahashavot belev ish, va'atzat Adonai yitaku. Right? We have a lot of thoughts that we go through and plans, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu's guiding, advice, guidance, thought, ultimately is what stands. It's what stands. So that when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Eloheinu Hashem Echad, we have to recognize what that means. That if we genuinely recognize that truth, that the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come to pass. And that we must have kivui, we have tikva for. And that this will ultimately, we will come out of this as we've come out of everything, because we are an indestructible people. Yes, there are casualties, painful, heartbreaking, horrible casualties. But we will come out of this as we come out of everything else. And so, besides, I don't just say that in order to be able to give chizuk. I hope it does give chizuk. Because as we say in the reading of the Haftarah every week, Lo nafal davar echad mikol dibaro hatov asher diber biad Moshe abdo. There's not one thing that he said to his servant Moshe that has not come to pass. And involved in that is Yisrael Osahai. Bilam happened to say that. Even he said that. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never forsake us. Gam biotam be'eretz oivahem lo me'astim lo ge'altim lechalotam. And we are not be'eretz oivahim right now. I mean, I am, many of us are, but we are now a nation on our land in the Aretz. Again, that is an absolute miracle and a siman of tikva. And we have to be able to come together as an Am Echad with regards to that. So there's a strong halakha. I said that I want to show you a halakha. There's a strong halakha that Harambam writes in Hilchot Milchama that I also think is very important for us to keep in mind, even as the supporting role, even as supporters in this Milchama. And it's true that the halakha that I'm going to quote for you is halakha for those that are engaged in the throes of war, right? For the hayalim that are actually in the middle of combat. But I do think that nonetheless it's a siman and something that we have to keep in mind. And so I'm going to read to you this halakha. This is in Devarim Kaf. Ki tetzeh lemilchama lo'oivecha. You should go, when you go out to war against your enemy, v'ra'ita sus v'rechev am rab mimmecha. You see a very heavy foe, right? A very well-armed enemy. Lo tira mehem. The Torah says, you do not be fearful of them. Don't be afraid. Ki Adonai Elohecha imach. Because the Lord your God is with you. Hama'alcha me'eretz Mitzrayim. The same one who took you out of Egypt. So you can be sure that there's nothing to be afraid of. And still, right now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't be afraid in the Torah. But then he says, there's psychology, there's mindset that has to be addressed. And so what I want to happen, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying in the Torah, is there needs to be a pep talk. There needs to be a talk of chizuk to the Am made by the Kohen Mashua Milchama. And it says, V'nigash HaKohen v'diber al Am. Right? So this shows that it is important to, so to speak, preach to the choir. Why? I always say it's important to preach to the choir because the choir needs to remember why they're singing. And so these are soldiers. What do you mean? The soldiers, they're ready to fight. They know why they're fighting. Still, the Kohen has to go and pep up the soldiers. He has to give them a talk of strength. Ve'amar alehim. And he has to say to them, Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael, atem kerevim hayom lamilchama lo'ivechem. You're coming now to war against your enemies. Al yarach lebabchem. Let not your hearts be soft. Al tireu v'al tahpezu v'al ta'atzu mepenehem. Don't fear, don't fret, don't falter before them. Strengthen your hearts. Hold strong. Don't let the heart go weak. Because your Lord, your God, He's the one that's fighting. He's walking with you. To fight for you. With your enemy to save you. Then the shoterim have to come and say, okay, well, we got to weed out, we have to take out those who are not ready to go into the war to be able to fight this way, who may have weaker hearts. So it says, who doesn't go back, who's built a new house and hasn't really had a chinuch for the bayit, who put a new kerem, hasn't been able to see the first fruits, who married or betrothed a woman, hasn't been able to bring her into her house. And then it says, finally, there's one more thing that they should say, and it's added here. It's not in the first three. This is an added thing. Now, who, after hearing the Kohen Mashuach Milchama giving the talk of Chizuk, the pep talk, who's still weak of heart, he has to go home. Why? Because a weak heart is contagious. And it affects the hearts of those around him. Let not the weakness of that person's heart be a contagion to the hearts of those around him. And that says the Torah recognizes that we are social species. And that we mirror very much the feelings that we have of those around us. And we have responsibility, and this is, I think, the key point that I wish to share. We have responsibility for the feelings and talk and approach that we bring into the room with other people, especially at this time. To the point that Torah sequesters this person if this person genuinely recognizes that he is not able to hold his heart strong during this time. So the Rambam writes a halacha with regards to this. And this is in Hilchot Menachim Perek Zayin, halacha Tedvav, in most editions. Rambam explains what is this mi ha'isha yareh v'racha levav. Right? What does it mean that this is something that the shotrim need to say to the people to make sure, right? The police have to make sure that these people are removed and sequestered from the fight of the war. Says Harambam, it's exactly what it sounds like. That the person doesn't have the strength of heart to stand in the throes of war. Rather, when a person goes into war, he must lean on the hope of Israel, right? That's the kivui. That's the tikva, the hope of Israel, u'moshio, and the savior of Israel. B'ait tzara, in all times of tsar, of oppression and danger, v'yada, and one must know, she'al Yehud Hashem oseh milchama, that the reason for the war is always Yehud Hashem, because the Yehud of Am Yisrael and the security of Am Yisrael is in and of itself the Yehud Hashem. Yasim nafsho bekapo. Yasim nafsho bekapo means he should hold his soul, right? Shouldn't fly away and be, flutter. Hold it in his hand, so to speak. V'lo yira, v'lo yifhad, v'lo yachshov. Shouldn't be afraid, shouldn't be fearful and frightful. And then it says, lo yachshov lo beishto, v'lo bebanav. A person who's in the middle of war cannot think of his wife or children. Rather, he has to wipe their thought out of his heart. And he removes every other thought from his mind, la milchama, to the war. A person who starts to falter and worry and question in the middle of the war is transgressing this lo ta'aseh. As it says there in the pasuk just before, do not be fearful and don't be weak of heart. So the reason why I bring this for us now, you say, well, what was it? Maz Kesher. So many of us are not in the throes of war. First of all, many of us are. And it's important for us to be able to know that. But beyond that, even in the supporting role, I think that this is important. We are responsible for the thought, for the speech, for the approach that we have when we walk into a room with other people right now in Klal Yisrael. And we cannot afford to allow our hearts to go soft. We have to be strong of heart. Because not only is it important for us to be strong of heart, and for us to be committed, and for us to focus, it's important that the weakness of heart does not become contagious and spread amongst others. And that is why it is very important for us to stand strong together. It's very important for those who are outside of Eretz Israel to go to the rallies and solidarity gatherings and so on. Why? Because it strengthens our hearts. And there is value in strengthening the heart this time, because our hearts need to be strong and focused and supporting. And it's important for people in Eretz Israel to stand strong together as one, to encourage each other, to support each other, and to have tikvah and hope in all of this. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do away chas v'shalom with Klal Yisrael. We are here now in miracle, and we will continue that way as an indestructible people. And that is really what I wanted to share. And I hope that it can be a chizuk. And knowing that this is a tremendously challenging and difficult time, we must know, I read the tefillot now, the regular tefillot of every day and the tehillim. It's so clear that our avot, our ancestors in so many generations, all of the hachamim and all of the generations, they lived in this. They lived in this. They wrote their tefillot based on these experiences. Our tahanunim, our everyday tefillot, the amidah of every day, is based on these experiences. So we must rely on those who came before us and their strength, and recognize that this is part of what it is to be Klal Yisrael, and that we must strengthen our resolve and our tikvah, and know, lo yitosh Adonai amo v'nachalato lo ya'azov, Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai barech t'amo b'shalom, u'ba l'tzion goel, Yagel Yaakov Yismach Israel. Thank you.